Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm here today with Colleen Capossela, Esquire, who is president of CATICPro Incorporated, which is a subsidiary of CATIC Financial Incorporated and a sister company to CATIC, offering bonds and various insurance products, including E&O, professional liability, crime, fidelity, and cyber. She's also director of internal compliance and audit for CATIC. Colleen's an attorney and licensed insurance producer and speaks regionally on risk management topics. She was selected in 2016 by the National Law Journal as a 2016 cybersecurity trailblazer for her educational efforts. Before joining CATIC and taking on the role as president of CATICPro, Colleen was in private practice in Connecticut, concentrating primarily on business law, commercial real estate, lender representation, and commercial financing. So Colleen, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity management issues, and I'm going to start off first by talking about what's been happening. And unfortunately, a lot has been happening. Our real estate industry as a whole is under attack, whether you're a law firm, conveyancer, realtor, lender. We are all prime targets in the minds of cyber criminals. There are actually organized crime businesses focused on attacking us to generate revenue. It's not just always a lone hacker looking to see what they can accomplish. There's actually organized businesses. Some even have human resource support. And what I'm experiencing in my field of risk management with the selling of crime and cyber insurance is that I'm hearing firsthand all too often from businesses of how they've been attacked in a variety of different ways. And it doesn't matter the size of your business, we all are at risk. Some smaller businesses at times think they aren't, or they're at less risk because criminals will want to go after the bigger fish, but that's not the case. Recent reports out this year noted that 71% of attacks were on small businesses. So the bottom line is cyber crimes are increasing, not going away, and it's becoming one of the biggest risks that we have to face in our businesses. Now, why is this? It's because we handle valuable. There's personal identification information, but you have to be careful. A lot of folks personal identification information like social security numbers and names and social security numbers and accounts, and that is very, very important, obviously. But there's other information these cyber criminals are after: financial information, trade secrets, business ventures, details of their clients' and customers' lives, as well as your own information about yourself and your business operations. They also want to try to figure out ways to procure funds from you, especially through those wire transfer fraud schemes. They know that we are, in our industry, in the real estate industry, customer-centric, that we focus on our clients and our customers, and we want to get matters closed as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and they're hoping for that. Because what's very interesting is their focus has changed from hacking technology and now includes more than ever hacking of people, really. Duping people, me, you, your staff, which is easier for them to accomplish. And how are they doing this? Well, there's a variety of different ways that they're utilizing. And most of them are referred to, or the most popular, are duping or tricking schemes. They're called social engineering tactics, which basically is the practice of manipulating users into performing certain actions that will provide the attacker privileged information or access to your computer. Tricking you or your staff into giving them passwords, bank information, customer information, or access to your computers to secretly install malicious software that will give these criminals access to information and control over your computer. You hear some of the tactics referred to as phishing schemes, and you hear terms like phishing, and this is really very generic term where they really don't know much about you or your business, but they masquerade as a trustworthy entity and send you an email that appears to come from a legitimate party, like a bank. And again, they're not targeting anybody. They're just throwing these emails out there, looking like they're coming from a reputable bank, and they're hoping you or your staff will respond. Give them valuable information or click on a link or an attachment so they can access your system. They're usually urgent, emails explaining there's a problem and that you need to verify and respond immediately. Then you also have what's referred to as spear phishing schemes, which this is more of a targeted approach. Usually it targets a group of people, they learn about you, they understand your business, they investigate you, and they learn about your business in such ways through social media or through even your own website. They learn about who your employees are, pictures, email addresses, the work you cover, what each position the employees hold in the company, and they use that information to target emails. They also have what's referred to as whaling schemes in these phishing tactics, and that's where the criminal goes after a specific target that's a bigger fish, going after like the lead executive in the business. And in many cases, the person being whaled is a high-profile executive or some other powerful figure that stands to lose more than just the average Joe. Some examples of these phishing schemes are very interesting. Now, the general phishing scheme, as I said before, you generally see those from reputable sources. So a bank might be requesting you or a staff person to verify account information, and it's urgent, and there's a problem with your account, and they're hoping that, once again, you're going to provide them with information, or you're going to click on something because you're going to think, oh my gosh, this is from my bank, and I'm going to click on it. Then there's the spear phishing tactics. And again, remember, those are the more targeted approaches. And a lot of the examples we're seeing out there in the industry and what's happening are things couched in terms of emails from your bosses. It's an email from your boss to act on something that you would normally do for him or her, like access an account or send funds or click on a link, click on an attachment. And you do it because your staff person feels that, the boss is asking for something and I have to do it. And it looks exactly like it's coming from the boss. Or you might get an email to a seller, buyer, realtor, or other attorney or bank on a real estate matter. And they want you to wire funds, attach instructions. They'll even call you to verify receipt or pretend they are the bank to stop you from acting. And that's what's really important to understand too. That's how tricky they are. It's not just emails, but they'll call you, and on your caller ID it might look like it's coming from a reputable source, and it's not, because they've hacked caller IDs as well. There was a recent news article last week, very topical right now, that showed how a judge in New York was scammed in her own real estate transaction, where she wired $1 million, and it's gone, it's lost. And it just goes to show that anyone can be duped in these spear phishing tactics. You also might receive an email from a reputable source, like an association. And again, you're thinking, this association, they want me to respond, and they say, please click on a link and provide information, and people are doing that. And unfortunately, it's a criminal on the other end. There's also whaling emails, as I said before, where it could be an email to a partner or a major player in the company and identifying a major issue going on, directed at that major player in the company, and that partner or major player clicks on a link for more details because they're not thinking, and they're thinking it came from a reputable source. So you end up providing funds or valuable information to a criminal, or infecting systems with malware viruses like ransomware or keylogger viruses. Ransomware viruses that can infect your system hold your system for ransom, and you are required, in order to see your data and use your systems, to give a ransom. And they want it in Bitcoin usually, which is digital currency, very difficult to trace. And unless you pay that, they're not going to release your data. Or maybe they even release your data, but you still have to do forensic analysis and forensic investigation to determine what else they did to your systems to make sure that you're protected. They also might infect your system with a keylogger virus or a keylogger program, and that's a virus where it takes a hold of your system, and from the point in time that they access your system, they can see every keylogging entry you make into the system, whether it's accessing an account or putting in somebody's information or private confidential client information or customer information. They can see every keystroke you're making. So it's very scary. Other cyber attacks and other methods they use is internet use. They're just putting viruses out on websites, of known websites, reputable websites, hoping you or your staff will click on just the right spot. For example, it could be on a retail site, and if you don't have restrictions in your office telling staff that they cannot go to just any website they want to, while they're working at your company, they have the potential of clicking on a virus by accessing these websites. And again, they're reputable websites now that criminals are targeting, and hoping that you'll click on something in there to set off a virus. There's also forensic recovery is a method they use. And this is interesting because this doesn't only include digital and technology matters, but also paper, because you can't forget about the paper. They're collecting information from discarded materials, whether it's paper thrown in the trash or discarded computer equipment or phones. They're finding personal information and account numbers and anything they can. We actually had a phony check scheme perpetrated based off copies of checks thrown in trash and not purged correctly. There's also baiting schemes that they're utilizing. This is where fraudsters leave an innocent-looking, malware-infected device, like a thumb drive or a DVD, outside your office for an employee to pick up and, out of curiosity, plug it or load it into your system and then load this infected device in there. And if you don't have a gatekeeper at your office who's in charge of making sure things are secure and not allowed to just be placed into your systems, an employee will do this, because what the criminals will do is they'll market 2017 employee salaries, and it will get anybody to be very curious and take the device and put it in the system to see what it has to say. And a test was done of this recently through a reputable technology expert with a number of companies, and it found that 47% of the employees failed the test. Theft or loss of physical equipment is also an issue. Mobile devices, laptops, smartphones, Wi-Fi free spots, and any free version of anything usually has a host of vulnerabilities, so you have to watch out for that. And third-party vendors, starting with janitors and even including cloud providers, any third parties you're involved with. Criminals gain access through third parties, so you have to make sure that the third parties you're dealing with are just as protected as you and comply with your requirements that you need to adhere to so that you're protected. And unfortunately, more and more we're hearing about insiders and rogue employees. They know the value of data, they know the value of information out there, and we've had a couple of cases where the issue in the cybercrime and cyber attack was the result of internal operations through rogue employees. And then lastly, because a lot of us are involved in closings or real estate matters, another scam that comes up a lot is one right at the closing table. They're sitting right at the table, depositing the check over their cell phone without you seeing it, and it's very quick, and then they hand the check back to you, whether it's a deposit check or a closing funding check, and say, oh, by the way, can you just wire this because we're going out of town? And it's very tricky, and there's a number of businesses that have been caught up in that scam as well. So why should you care? What are some of the concerns that result? Well, you have the costs, which add up very quickly. If, for example, you have a breach of your system and data is stolen, you could experience first-party losses like loss of data, loss of business income, business interruption, restoration, recreation, and remediation costs, PR costs, and reputational damages. You also might have notification and credit monitoring expenses. Postage alone there could be huge, and those notification and credit monitoring expenses are based on whatever state law says. Almost every state has breach notification statutes, and there's a lot of costs associated with what a business has to do when they experience a breach. You have extortion expenses and maybe ransom requests that you have to fulfill, like those ransomware issues and paying the ransom to unlock your system. And you could have privacy attorney costs. Then there's also the third-party losses, like damages to third parties, regulatory investigation, penalties, civil fines, legal expenses. There is liability, even if there's no specific law, rule, or regulation applicable to your business. There's a standard of care from a liability perspective, a reasonableness standard, a cost-benefit analysis, basically, for determining negligence and assigning liability. Balancing the burden and cost of taking adequate precautions against the magnitude and the gravity of the potential loss in a situation, multiplied by the probability of that loss occurring, that's the standard that's used. And that can weigh in the side of the favor of the party who experiences the loss. So what this is boiled down to is that it's offering a framework, absent clear present practices or laws applicable to your business, And it's telling the courts that everybody really should be taking some measure to protect their business and the data they maintain. And then there may be, in relation to your business, laws, rules, and regulations that are specifically applicable to you in this area, and that you're required to follow certain cybersecurity protocols and procedures and adhere to certain things. And it all depends upon the type of business you run, the practice areas you're involved in, the customers that you're representing, the business deals you're involved in, the functions, the data handling. So there could be any number of different laws, rules, and regulations that are applicable to you, and you have to be in compliance both on a state and federal level. And what is out there is like a patchwork. Truly, you need to be an expert in privacy law to understand what is applicable to your operation in your business today. You could even have federal regulations applicable to your business. Maybe not directly, but indirectly through the regulation of banks and insurance companies, because they are required to make sure that their vendors are secure and that their vendors implement security programs, and those vendors could be you, the realtor. Then on the state level, you have laws like the privacy laws, for example, that vary between states as to who they apply to. Could be if you're doing business in their state or merely maintaining personal identification information of a resident of their state that causes the law to be applicable. And these laws started out as simple notification breach statutes to customers in the event you experienced a breach. But some now have evolved into including credit monitoring requirements. Connecticut just added that. And other states go well beyond that and require some security implementation requirements that businesses need to follow. Massachusetts is known for that. They have a more detailed regulation. So it's a good one to review. So I've provided you with a link to their checklist of what they say individuals or small businesses need to adhere to if they're going to, if there's statutes applicable to them and they're doing business with residents of Massachusetts. And it shows the different security measures that you have to be having in place and having written security policies in place. Also, you have to be concerned about your contractors. Any contracts you get involved in now, lenders and insurers, for example, you need to be concerned about what you are signing and what you're representing regarding security measures that you've put in place in your business. And you have to do what you say you are doing. You can't just have a policy and say, oh yes, I have a policy. You actually have to implement it, or it could lead to a lot of trouble. You also need to be concerned if you are a victim of a breach or a wire transfer fraud scheme about potential loss of goodwill and reputation. So with this, you can see you need to manage your risk and put in place some security matters. No longer can anybody do nothing. You have to be doing something. And there's no such thing as preventing, instead it's minimizing. You may not be able to prevent a breach, but you can take steps to maximize your defenses and minimize the impact. It's all about risk management. Doing nothing is not an option. You have to at least take reasonable measures or more if required by law. And solutions require careful thought or planning and deployment. Now, to assist, I'm going to go over some items to consider, but there's no one-size-fits-all plan. It depends on your operation. But this can help give some guidance. And also, bear in mind, there are a lot of resources out there to help you plan security initiatives. Resources like through your own associations, through your insurance carriers, lenders, the FBI. The Federal Trade Commission has a lot of free resources on their website. But again, just to give you some guidance, I'm going to go through some approaches that might help. And I always say start with the team. And you need to identify your team. Best practice is a cross-functional team with a combination of specialties to protect your business, meet privacy and regulatory compliance, and to handle a data breach. Figure out who your team is now and have them assist in the creation of your plan. It's not just technology risk, it's a business risk. Just like your financial plan, it needs time and attention and requires a number of players and focused thought. You don't want to wait until a breach because you'll be scrambling and the costs will be much greater most likely. I provide you with a suggested list of players that you could add to your team, and where you would want to make sure you have their contact info and talk to them about different security initiatives that you could put in place. But I'm just going to review some of the top 5 or top 4 because we're limited on time. First and foremost, you're going to want to make sure that you have a key personnel involved. Obviously, it's going to take information and knowledge about how you run your business to figure out what the best strategic security plan is going to be put in place. And if you're an individual and it's just you, then it's you. You have to be involved in this. Then you need to think about getting a connection with a cybersecurity privacy attorney. If your current attorney that you use as a resource is not a cybersecurity privacy attorney, you might want to find somebody or get a referral, because you're going to need that specialist to help you figure out what laws, rules, and regulations are applicable to you, because as I said before, there's a patchwork out there. And then you're also going to want forensic technology security specialists. We all have had the technology support, standard technology support, where we need somebody to help us make sure our systems are running and our applications are running. But you also need a forensic technology security specialist to help you, because they're the people who are going to help you beyond just making sure your systems are running. They're going to be the ones helping you to prevent things from happening and to detect if things are happening and to secure your operations. So you should be checking with your tech people to determine whether or not they have that appropriate background, and if they don't, you need to find people that do. And then again, I've listed a number of other people that you should consider on your team, but for sake of time, I'm going to go on to the next slide. You have to understand the applicable obligations and responsibilities that govern over you and your business, the laws, the rules, the regulations. I've said that already, right? And that means you need to consult with a cybersecurity privacy attorney and determine, based on what each person does in your business and the matters that are handled, what you are absolutely obligated and responsible to do from a security planning perspective, and what you have to implement, and then be prepared to do that. And then also consider what you are concerned about above and beyond this. You may want to do more than what's actually required of you for customer relation purposes and for business purposes. Some measures to consider when you're thinking about security plans and what you want to implement. And again, this is not a complete list. We don't have a lot of time today, but this should be helpful in getting you started. And you need to talk again to your technology representatives and also your security privacy attorney. But things that you want to be focused on is having proper, adequate backup. During those ransomware attacks, there's a lot of times when businesses are finding out a little too late that their backup actually had been infiltrated, or there were issues with their backup, because yes, they're backing up, but they're not testing their backup. Very important. Patching and updating regularly, very important to patch up a number of vulnerabilities that could be in programs. You might want to consider using an IPS, an intrusion protection system. These are systems that automatically block malicious traffic, or intrusion detection systems, monitoring and alerting for known malicious traffic or websites, file types, etc. Talk to your technology people about that. Also install proper firewalls, antivirus and anti-malware. Employ encryption. You have to be employing encryption, especially on substantive matters. And lock down physical computer ports. Restrict the use of the people in your office of using removable medias like USB, thumb drives, CDs, DVDs, because they can have a whole host of viruses on them, and if you don't have control over what's going into your system, it's a problem. You're also going to want to consider logging user activity and watching that and keeping tabs on it. And user access, and consider the principle of least privilege, of limiting user access. Everybody doesn't need access to everything. It makes you more vulnerable. Figure out what users really need access to and only grant those rights for them. And don't forget, you need that gatekeeper to help you with your system. So put somebody in charge of that. Make sure you have passwords that are very complicated. 9-character passwords are necessary now. It takes seconds for a criminal to figure out a 6-character password. So you just don't want to be doing that any longer. You've got to make them very complicated, and don't reuse the same password for different matters. And 2-factor or multi-factor authentication is almost necessary. FBI recommends it highly, where you're not just have a login and password, a complicated password, but you also have maybe somebody, you have a feature where it requires that there's a call-in and you have to give a PIN so that you can access your own system. Give some thought to that. Also, restrict access to websites that are not business related or not important to your business. Don't let staff just visit any website because of those virus issues. Protect your systems and what your staff is doing on them. If you're using leased equipment, scrub it. If you get rid of your leased equipment because the lease is up and you want to rent something else, don't just hand it over. Think about everything you're releasing from your operations and make sure it's clean and scrubbed and doesn't have confidential information on it. Conduct quarterly penetration tests of all systems. You would work with your technology people on doing that to see if what you're putting in place actually works. And you have to do some monitoring and detection to make sure that your security measures that you're putting in place aren't being infiltrated. And then you want reports to review. And then also, most importantly too, is having a record retention policy, a data retention and use policy for your office operation, which it should go into detail about what information and data are people allowed to bring into your systems and into your office. How long do you want to keep it? How long do you have to manage it? And how are you going to manage it? And then when can you get rid of it? Because data information has made every business very vulnerable. So you need to gather control of what your business retains and how you're managing both paper and data within your office operations. And also, don't forget to have an incident response plan in place. What are you going to do if you have a breach? Who do you have to contact? What are the steps you're going to be doing to secure the evidence? Who are you going to call first to help you with that? What if it's a wire transfer fraud scheme? Who are you going to call first? What are you going to do? Very, very important to consider. Basic security measures to consider for email, because there's so many email phishing schemes going on. I think it's important to give it its own slide here. Do not rely on email for substantive matters anymore, like financial transfers. You cannot. You have to remember the judge story I just told you. Anybody can be duped, and think about it. $1 million in a matter of seconds is gone. Avoid clicking on links or clicking on attachments in email without verifying from a known reputable source, somebody that you know you've been working with, to verify whether or not that's a valid email. And don't use the email information that you're receiving to verify off of. Use the telephone number that you know of before you call that person. And use encryption when you're sending emails. You have to think before you click and verify before you click. And one note that I'm hearing a lot is, if you're responding to an email, respond. You want to forward emails, because what that requires you to do is type in the valid email address. So if you just quickly respond to somebody, you might be responding to the criminal off of the tricky email that they gave you because you can't tell that it's an invalid email. But if you click forward and then respond to the party who contacted you, you are forced to put in the email, and it helps safeguard you a little bit. And watch out what you're putting in the subject line of emails, because keywords like wire or wire transfer, stuff like that, they're watching for keywords in real estate transactions to figure out who they want to infiltrate and what they want to do. What else can you do? You've got to educate and train and enforce. Make it important to your staff and your customers. Get people on board with what protocols and procedures you're putting in place, that it's important to your business, and identify, especially in closing matters, how you're going to be handling the funds, transfers, and information flow. Decide that up front with all the players in the transaction, and don't allow changes to it. You're going to want to test, monitor, and audit the security plans that you've put in place. Don't forget to do that, because it's ever changing. It's not going to go away. And maybe what you put in place last year isn't going to be good next year. So you've got to make sure you're always on top of it and do regular monitoring and auditing. And engage in due diligence with your third-party vendors, as I said before, especially iCloud providers. Make sure they're protected. Make sure you understand your rights associated with if there's a breach and what happens between the parties. Speak with lenders regarding security matters. A lot of lenders have different security protocols and programs that could help a business, but they don't identify it. It's really up to you to ask about it. They could put blocks on international transfers, for example, if you're not involved in international activities, or ACH accounts. If you don't allow debit accounts happening from your accounts, why not put a block or a hold on it? Or get involved in positive pay, where that's really kind of like a checks and balance program with the banks, where they will not fund any checks that have been issued without a second verification and working with your business. So you get that nice checks and balance before anybody can put forward a check scheme. And obviously obtain proper cyber and crime insurance coverage. And proper is the key word here. You need cyber insurance for those first-party and third-party losses I talked about earlier. Cyber will cover a whole host of breach expenses. You just have to make sure you got the right cyber insurance policy and be careful about the exclusions and the limitations. But then you also need crime coverage for when something's stolen, or for those wire transfer fraud schemes, because it's not covered by what you hear as cyber coverage. That's covered by crime coverage. And in fact, you need to have special social engineering coverage endorsement to crime coverage in order to be covered for these wire transfer fraud schemes. And there's not a lot of carriers that provide that coverage. They don't want to cover it because there's a lot of risks. So you have to know the difference. You have to know what you're buying, what you're getting, and understand it, because you don't want to be in a breach situation or a wire transfer fraud situation and think that the insurance you currently have, or some business insurance you might have, comprehensive general or your E&O, covers it for you, because in most cases it doesn't. Or there's a lot of limitations or exclusions on it. So you have to be very careful. Again, only some carriers will provide you with the social engineering coverage that you need for crime coverage for those wire transfer fraud schemes. Make sure you talk to the right brokers and they understand this area, because some brokers will guide you towards a cyber insurance policy thinking that wire transfer, because it was due to an email fraud, cyber coverage is what you need, and that's not the case. And that's really it in the time that we have today. A lot of information to digest in a short time, but you have to take what you're learning and act on it now, because there are too many businesses, and I know this, they call me regularly, that are being adversely affected. So you need to be focusing on this for your business. It's crucial. We're going to open it up for questions right now and see if there's any. And I don't think we are seeing any currently. My information, my contact information can be obtained from the association. So if you have any questions or you want additional information on this topic, please let me know, and I'd be happy to help. And thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Colleen.